The cookie offering. I still remember that Day of the Dead when I was 12 years old, the first time I helped my grandmother prepare the altar. It was a pivotal moment in my life, one that would forever change how I understood the connection between the living and the dead. My name is Miguel Vallejo, and I grew up in Puebla, Mexico. Back then, I lived with my grandmother while my parents traveled frequently for their jobs at a travel agency. My grandmother, a petite woman with silver hair and eyes as deep and dark as wells, was my guide to the world of traditions and rituals that had been passed down through generations in our family. Each item on the altar has a meaning, Miguel, my grandmother explained as we arranged bright orange marigolds across the table. The scent of these flowers will guide the souls of our departed loved ones back to us. Our altar was dedicated to my grandmother's siblings, an uncle who had passed away young, my grandmother's beloved cat, and most importantly, my grandfather. I never met him, he died before I was born, but through my grandmother's stories I felt as if he were always nearby. He was a gentleman with a mischievous smile, and his greatest joy in life was savoring chocolatines, cookies with nuts and marshmallow filling inside. "Your grandfather loved these cookies best," my grandmother said, placing a fresh package on the altar beneath my grandfather's photograph. A tall man with a thick mustache and keen eyes. He always said heaven wouldn't be complete without them. As the altar took its final form, I couldn't help but notice all the delicious food items displayed across it. Fruits, candy, pan de muerto, and of course grandfather's favorite cookies. My grandmother knew her grandson well, so she always prepared some treats just for me so I wouldn't be tempted to take from the offerings. "Remember, Miguel," my grandmother warned, her voice stern but her eyes full of love. "The items on the altar are for the departed. If you take them, they'll have nothing to enjoy when they visit us, and they might become sad or even angry." Her warning sent a shiver down my spine. I had never dared to touch anything on the altar until that night. That evening I couldn't sleep. Hunger gnawed at my stomach and images of those chocolate cookies kept flashing in my mind. I knew my grandmother had gone to bed hours ago. The light from her room had been extinguished for over 2 hours. The house was wrapped in darkness and silence, with only the faint glow from the candles on the altar seeping through the door crack, casting dancing shadows on the wall. I tossed and turned, trying to banish thoughts of those cookies. But the more I tried to forget, the more intensely I craved them. Finally, I decided to get a glass of water, hoping it would help me forget my hunger. I crept out of my room, trying not to make a sound. The old wooden floor creaked beneath my bare feet, each tiny noise making my heart pound. I made it to the kitchen, drank a cold glass of water, but instead of heading back to my room, my feet led me to the living room where the altar stood. The altar glowed in the candlelight, the vibrant marigolds looking like small flames in the darkness. And my eyes immediately went to the package of chocolatines cookies under my grandfather's photograph. "The items on the altar are for the departed," my grandmother's words echoed in my mind. But then another thought crept in. Grandfather would probably not mind if I took just one. He was always generous, wasn't he? My hand trembled as I reached for the cookie package. I carefully lifted it, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The package in my hand seemed much heavier than its actual weight, as if carrying all my guilt and shame. I snuck back to my room, quietly closing the door behind me. But as I looked at the package in my hands, an overwhelming sense of guilt washed over me. I thought about my grandfather, whom I had never met but had heard so much about. Was he watching me right now? Would he be disappointed? The guilt was so crushing that I couldn't bring myself to open the package. I decided to put it back. I crept out again, returned the package to its place on the altar, and whispered an apology to my grandfather. Then I hurried back to my room, feeling relieved but still anxious. I curled up under my blanket, hoping my grandmother wouldn't discover my misdeed in the morning. That night I dreamed of a man with a thick mustache sitting by my bed smiling. In my dream he handed me a cookie carefully wrapped in a napkin. "This is for you," he said, his voice warm and familiar, though I had never heard it. "You don't have to sneak around. I always wanted to share with you." I was startled awake the next morning when my grandmother knocked on my door. Sunlight was already streaming through the curtains, signaling a new day had begun. "Miguel, wake up!" My grandmother's voice called out with a note of urgency I didn't usually hear in her tone. I opened the door and immediately realized something was wrong. My grandmother stood there, her face stern, but her eyes held something I couldn't quite read, confusion perhaps, or worry, or even fear. "Did you take your grandfather's cookies?" she asked bluntly, without preamble. My heart sank. How did she know I'd been careful to put the package back in exactly the same position? Had I done something wrong? I did, grandmother. I admitted, my voice shaking. But I put them back. "I'm really sorry. I didn't eat any. I put them all back." My grandmother stared at me with a puzzled expression. Then her eyes shifted to my bedside table. "Then what is that? Who opened them?" I turned around and froze. On the bedside table there was a chocolatine's cookie wrapped carefully in a white napkin. Exactly like in my dream. I don't know," I stammered, reaching out to pick up the cookie. "Did you put it here, grandmother?" My grandmother shook her head slowly, then raised her hand, showing me another cookie also wrapped in a napkin. "I found this on the kitchen table this morning," she said, her voice trembling. I looked at her, completely confused. "I don't understand. I didn't take the cookies out of the package. I just took the package to my room and then put it back untouched. I swear, grandmother." Something changed in my grandmother's eyes. She took my hand. "Come with me," she said, her voice suddenly dropping. We walked to the altar. The package of chocolatine's cookies was still there under my grandfather's photograph, but it had been opened. Only one cookie remained inside, and the packaging had been carefully folded to preserve the remaining cookie. I looked up at my grandfather's photograph. In the morning light, I could swear his smile was a bit wider than it had been the day before. "Miguel," my grandmother said, her voice shaking and her eyes welling with tears, "do you know that this package always contains 3 cookies?" I shook my head. "And do you know what your grandfather always did when he opened a package of cookies?" I shook my head again, a strange feeling rising within me. "Your grandfather would always eat 1 cookie, give me 1, and give 1 to whichever grandchild was visiting at the time," my grandmother explained, tears rolling down her cheeks. "He always said the greatest joy wasn't in eating cookies, but in sharing them with those he loved." I looked down at the cookie in my hand, carefully wrapped in a napkin, and then at the cookie in my grandmother's hand, wrapped identically. "It wasn't you," my grandmother said, her voice filled with emotion. "It was your grandfather. He came and shared the cookies with us, just as he always did when he was alive." We sat together, eating the cookies in silence, each lost in our own thoughts. The sweet taste of chocolate and nuts mingled with the mixed emotions of fear, wonder, and a strange kind of joy. "You know," my grandmother finally spoke, "your grandfather always said he would never truly leave us, that he would always find a way to be with us." I nodded, looking up at my grandfather's picture. "I just wish I could have met him." "You did meet him," my grandmother smiled gently, "last night when he visited you. After that day, I never dared to take anything from the Day of the Dead altar again. Not out of fear, but out of a newfound respect for the ritual and its true meaning. The departed don't really leave us, they just exist in a different way, and during special days like the Day of the Dead, the veil between our world and theirs becomes thinner. Every year since then, I always placed a package of chocolatines on my grandfather's altar. And every morning of November 2nd, I would wake up and find 2 cookies carefully wrapped in napkins, 1 for me and 1 for my grandmother. The package on the altar would always be opened with 1 cookie remaining inside. My grandmother passed away when I was 20. The first year without her, I still set up the altar, placing her picture next to my grandfather's and a package of chocolatines below. On the morning of November 2nd, I woke up and found 3 cookies carefully wrapped in napkins. One on the kitchen table, one on my bedside table, and one carefully placed on my grandmother's favorite chair. The Day of the Dead isn't about sadness or loss. It's about recognizing that death is not the end of love or connection. Those who have passed continue to love and care for us in ways we sometimes cannot understand. But there's one detail I've never told anyone. The chocolatines cookies that Gamesa produces always have 3 in a package. Always 3. Never more, never less. Yet this year, when I opened the package to place on the altar, I found 4 cookies. 4, not 3. And last night I dreamed of my grandfather sitting by my bed, smiling. "I brought someone with me," he said. "Someone who very much wants to meet you." I woke up in a cold sweat. Next to my bed on the nightstand was a carefully wrapped cookie. But this time it wasn't a chocolatine. It was a type of cookie I had never seen before. And beside it was a handwritten note in handwriting I didn't recognize. "Son, I finally found you. We have so much to talk about." My father had gone missing during a trip to Mexico City 10 years ago, and no one had ever found his body. Now I sit here holding this strange cookie and this note, wondering if tonight, when the candles are lit and the marigolds fill the air with their scent, I will finally meet the father I lost so long ago, the father who perhaps has been searching for me from the other side all this time. They say the Day of the Dead is when the boundary between worlds is thinnest, when those who have left us can return if only for a night. I used to think it was just a beautiful tradition, a way to remember those we've lost. Now I know better. It's not about remembering the dead. It's about reconnecting with them. And sometimes, if you're lucky, they bring messages. Messages that can change everything you thought you knew about your family, about love, about the nature of life and death itself. Tonight I will light an extra candle. I will put out an extra plate. And I will wait with both fear and hope in my heart to see what or who comes through the veil this time, because the dead do return on the Day of the Dead. They come bearing cookies wrapped in napkins, and sometimes they come bearing truths that have been buried for far too long. And as the sun sets and shadows lengthen across my altar, I can't help but wonder if my father's soul can find me after 10 years. What else might be possible? What other connections might be waiting to be restored? What other mysteries might be solved if we just knew how to listen to the whispers from the other side? I placed the strange cookie back on my altar next to the note. I had a photograph I found in an old album, my father young and smiling before he disappeared. And I wait, counting the hours until darkness falls and the boundary between worlds grows thin once more. Because on the Day of the Dead, the greatest offerings aren't the ones we place on the altar for the departed. They're the ones the departed bring back to us. The nahual visitor. In 1999, I worked as a night guard at a private warehouse in Gomez Palacio on the outskirts of Torreon, Mexico. My name is Carlos Mendoza, and what I experienced during one Day of the Dead still haunts me more than 2 decades later. The job was simple patrol, the premises keep the keys and hand them over to my replacement in the morning. Nothing extraordinary, we were even allowed to doze off when things were quiet. The warehouse wasn't as large as the name might suggest, mainly storing automotive parts and related supplies. I had a small guard booth with a thick steel door, security camera monitors, and an old radio that I kept at a low volume. The guard booth was adjacent to the staff break room space with a table, a microwave, a coffee machine, and during that October, a Day of the Dead altar that we employees had built together. "Everyone choose a loved one to remember, Mr. Morales," the warehouse owner had suggested when proposing the idea. "We'll build the altar together, each bringing food their loved ones enjoyed, and remember them in our own way." I placed a photo of my father, who had died a few years earlier from heart disease. Next to his picture, I placed a small bottle of tequila and his favorite cigar. Luis, the warehouse technician, put up a picture of his grandmother and a plate full of sweet tamales. Elena from administration placed a photo of her brother who had died in a motorcycle accident, along with a can of Corona beer he had favored. Each person had their own little corner of the altar for their departed loved ones. Only Diego, a young delivery guy, seemed reluctant. He eventually brought a faded photograph of an elderly man with a scowling face placed beside an empty plate. Nobody asked questions. Everyone has their own way of remembering the dead. The altar was completed on October 31st, vibrant with orange marigolds, sugar skulls, and white candles. We set it up in the corner of the break room, visible from the window of my guard booth. Each night we lit candles on the altar and let them burn until they extinguished themselves. "Be careful tonight, Carlos," Luis told me as he finished his shift on November 1st. "Tonight is when the souls of adults return. They might not be happy if they see someone watching." I laughed and dismissed the warning. I'd worked many night shifts in my life and never encountered anything unusual. I wasn't superstitious, though I respected traditions. After everyone left, I locked the doors, made my first round of the warehouse, checking all entrances. Everything was secure. I returned to my guard booth, leaned back in my chair, and turned the radio on low. The only light in the break room came from the candles on the altar, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Nothing indicated that tonight would be different. Nothing suggested I would witness something I still can't explain even to this day. I must have dozed off for about an hour before a sound woke me. I'm not sure exactly what it was, perhaps a breeze through a partially open window or a slight rustling from somewhere in the building. When I opened my eyes, the room was pitch black except for a faint glow from the window, the light from the candles on the altar outside in the hallway. I turned toward the break room, but something made me pause. I was hearing footsteps. Someone was walking in the staff room where the altar was located. I immediately became fully alert, straightening up and turning off the radio. The footsteps continued. These weren't the sound of normal shoes or slippers, not the sound of rubber soles hitting the floor or the clack of heels. This was a different kind of sound, a kind I'd never heard before. The footsteps had a strange rhythm, not walking, not running, but like hopping or some kind of movement I couldn't identify. And there was another sound, accompanying each step, a sharp sound like claws scratching on the floor. I sat still listening, trying to determine exactly what the sound was and where it was coming from. It was strange. All doors were locked, all windows closed. I was the only one with keys. No one could have entered without making a loud noise and being detected by me. Curiosity gradually gave way to concern as the footsteps continued in the next room. The sound wasn't loud, but in the silence of the late night, it was as clear as if someone were standing right next to me. Tick-tack, 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 like a living clock, regular and patient. Finally, I decided to investigate. I slowly stood up, trying not to make a sound. I moved to the guard booth door, from which I could look directly into the break room. The thick metal door between the two rooms had a small window at eye level. I placed my hand on the doorknob, my hand trembling for reasons I couldn't explain. A cold sensation ran down my spine as I slowly turned the knob. The footsteps stopped. I stood still, holding my breath, waiting. Nothing. No sound, no footsteps. Then slowly the sound began again. Not farther away, but closer, as if whoever or whatever was making that sound had moved toward the door. I let go of the doorknob and instead peered through the small window. The break room was dark, illuminated only by the dim light from the candles on the altar. At first I saw nothing. Then a shadow moved across my field of vision. It was a shadow I couldn't see details in the weak light, but it had the shape of a person about 5-9 inches tall, moving with an odd gait, as if limping or hopping from one foot to the other. The shadow moved toward the altar, and as it came closer, I could see its lower part more clearly, the feet. No, not human feet, not normal human feet. They were the feet of a large bird covered with feathers, with sharp claws scratching the floor, creating that strange sound I had heard. I couldn't believe my eyes. My heart was beating so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I quickly backed away from the door, returned to my desk, and grabbed my cell phone. With trembling hands, I called Raul, a friend who also worked as a guard at a nearby store. "Raul," I whispered when he answered, "I need you, man." "Carlos, what's going on? You sound like you've seen a ghost," Raul replied, his voice groggy with sleep. There's something in the warehouse," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "In the break room near the altar. I don't know what it is, but it has bird feet." Silence from the other end of the line. Then Raul chuckled. "Are you drunk or just dreaming?" "I'm serious," I insisted. "I don't know what it is, but there's something here. And it's not human." Raul sighed. "All right, I'll come over. Give me 15 minutes. I hung up relieved that I wouldn't have to face whatever was in the break room alone, but when I looked back through the window, I saw nothing. No shadow, no bird feet. The break room appeared completely empty. The footsteps had also stopped. Raul arrived 20 minutes later. I heard a knock at the door and checked the security camera to confirm it was him. I let him in, feeling relieved at seeing a familiar face. "So, Carlos," Raul asked, looking around the guard booth, "where's your ghost bird?" I shook my head, no longer feeling humorous. "I don't know. The sound stopped right after I called you. But I saw it, Raul. I wasn't drunk and I wasn't dreaming." Raul looked at me, his expression of skepticism slowly changing as he realized I was genuinely frightened. "Okay," he said. "So you heard footsteps from the break room, and when you looked through the window, you saw a person with bird feet." "I know it sounds crazy," I admitted. "But yes, it looked like a normal person from the waist up, but the lower part, those were the feet of a large bird with feathers and claws." Raul shrugged. "We should check it out. Got a flashlight?" I took 2 flashlights from my desk drawer, handed one to Raul. Together, we approached the break room door. "I'll stay in the guard booth," Raul said. "Ready to call the police if needed. You go in and see if there's anything." I wasn't sure that was a good idea, but I also didn't want to admit I was too scared to check. I slowly opened the door, shining my flashlight into the darkness of the break room. Nothing. No sign of anything unusual. The tables and chairs were still in place, the altar intact, candles still burning. I stepped inside, shining my flashlight around the room, checking every corner. "Nothing here," I called to Raul, feeling both relieved and confused. "The room is empty." I checked the floor, looking for traces, claw marks, feathers, anything. But the floor was clean, with no signs that anything strange had ever been there. "Are you sure you weren't dreaming?" Raul asked, stepping into the break room, his flashlight sweeping across the altar. "I'm sure," I insisted. "I heard it, Raul. I saw it. It was right here, moving around the room." Raul looked at me with concerned eyes. "Could have been a shadow from something. Maybe a tree outside the window or a stray cat on the roof." I shook my head. "There's no tree near the window and the sound came from inside this room, not from the roof." We checked the entire warehouse, the corridors, offices, storage areas. No signs of a break-in, no windows or doors ajar. Everything was secure and normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Raul stayed with me for another hour, drinking coffee and chatting, trying to calm me down. Finally, he had to return to his own job. "Call me if you hear anything else," he said as he left. "And Carlos maybe cut down on the horror movies." I forced a smile and locked the door behind him. The rest of the night passed in silence. No footsteps, no strange shadows. But I couldn't sleep anymore. I sat at my desk, staring at the security camera monitors and the guard booth window, waiting for dawn. The next morning, Mr. Morales, the warehouse owner, arrived early as usual. He was always the first to arrive and the last to leave. I was preparing to hand over my shift when I decided to tell him about the strange experience from the previous night. "Perhaps we should check the security footage," Mr. Morales said, his face more serious than I had expected. "Let's see if anything was captured." We sat together in the guard booth, reviewing the footage from the night before. There I was on the screen, dozing off in my chair, then suddenly waking up, turning off the radio, and standing to move toward the door. I looked through the small window, then backed away, fear evident on my face, all exactly as I remembered. But when we switched to the camera in the break room, which should have captured whatever I had seen through the window, the screen only showed static. No image, just a black screen with flickering white dots. "Strange," Mr. Morales muttered, checking the timestamp. The camera was working normally before and after this time, but from 2:17 to 2:19 a.m., exactly the time you say you saw something, there's no recording. I felt a chill run down my spine. "Do you think it was a technical glitch?" Mr. Morales didn't answer immediately. He looked at me, his expression unreadable. Then he lowered his voice, although only the two of us were in the room. "Carlos, do you believe in things that can't be explained?" I didn't know how to answer. Before last night, I would have probably laughed and said no, but now... "I don't know, sir," I answered honestly. "I know what I saw, Mr. Morales nodded, appearing thoughtful. "I believe you, Carlos, and I think I know what you saw." He stood up, gesturing for me to follow him to the break room. We stood before the altar, and Mr. Morales pointed to the photograph that Diego had placed there, the elderly man with the scowling face. "This is Diego's grandfather," Mr. Morales explained. "Mateo Vega. I knew him from many years ago. He wasn't a good man, Carlos. He practiced ancient rituals. There were rumors, whispers about him and what he did in his private home." I looked at the photograph, feeling another chill. "What are you saying, sir?" Mr. Morales lowered his voice even further. "People said that Mateo was a brujo, a witch, but not the kind that heals and helps people. He practiced black magic, called upon things that shouldn't be called, and changed himself." "Changed?" I asked, feeling my mouth go dry. "There's an ancient legend from before even the Aztecs about people who could transform into animals nahuales. Not just in their minds, but actually transform. Most brujos change into wolves, jaguars, or powerful animals. But Mateo, people said he chose birds, a large bird with claws sharp as razors." I stood there, unable to believe what I was hearing. "Are you saying I saw the spirit of a witch who could turn into a bird?" Mr. Morales looked me straight in the eyes. "The Day of the Dead isn't just when our loved ones return, Carlos. It's when the veil between this world and the next is thinnest. Things can cross over both good and bad." He reached into his pocket and took out a silver bracelet, a San Benito bracelet with symbols and Latin inscriptions carved into it. "Wear this," he said, placing it in my hand. "It has been blessed. It will protect you. Tonight is the second night of the Day of the Dead. Good souls will return and watch over you, but be careful." I put on the bracelet, feeling slightly foolish but also grateful. "Do you think it will return?" "I don't think so," Mr. Morales said, "but we shouldn't take chances." I took my night shift that evening with a vague sense of apprehension. But the night passed quietly, with no strange footsteps or bird-legged shadows. 3 days later, I heard that Diego had abruptly quit his job. No one knew exactly why, but there were rumors that he had moved far away out of Torreon altogether. A week after that, I happened upon Mr. Morales removing photos from the altar as it was time to dismantle it. I noticed he held Mateo's photograph with a handkerchief, not touching it directly, and placed it in a plastic bag. "What are you going to do with it?" I asked, curious. "Burn it," he replied curtly, "and scatter the ashes at a crossroads, with salt." I never asked more about it, and we never mentioned what had happened that night again. I continued to work at the warehouse for 2 more years without encountering anything similarly strange. But I kept the San Benito bracelet. I still wear it every day even now, 26 years after the incident. And each year on the Day of the Dead, I light a special candle not for a loved one, but to ward off darkness. Because there's one thing I've never told anyone. Sometimes in my dreams, I still hear those strange footsteps, the sound of claws scratching on the floor. And sometimes when I wake up, I find long scratches on the wooden floor beside my bed, as if someone or something had been standing there watching me in the night. My grandmother always said that the Day of the Dead isn't just about remembering the departed, but also about protecting ourselves from what might follow them from the other side. Never put a photo of a bad person on your altar, she would warn. You never know who or what might answer that invitation. And if you ever see a person with bird feet, run. Run as far as you can, because a nahual never forgets a face and never passes up an opportunity. Last night I found a black feather on my pillow when I woke up. It was larger than any bird I've ever seen in this region. And when I picked it up, I could swear I heard a soft chuckle from a dark corner of the room. Tonight is November 1st, the first night of the Day of the Dead. I've moved the furniture away from the walls of my bedroom. I've scattered salt across the thresholds and windowsills. I've hung mirrors facing outward. As the old stories say, nahuales can't stand to see their reflection. It reveals their true nature even to themselves. And I sit here writing this down, the San Benito bracelet tight around my wrist, wondering if it will be enough. 26 years is a long time for the living, but for the dead, for creatures that exist between worlds, it might be nothing more than a blink of an eye. They say nahuales can live for centuries, passing their knowledge and powers to chosen successors. They say they can track a scent across worlds and through time. They say they remember every slight, every insult, every witness to their true nature. I've started researching more about them in recent years. I've spoken to curanderos and old women who still remember the ancient ways. They all tell me the same thing. What I saw that night wasn't just a spirit, it wasn't just a ghost. It was something older, something that predates even the Aztec Empire, something that has roots in the very soil of Mexico, in the bones of the ancient ones who walked these lands before history began to be recorded. And they all give me the same warning: be careful on the Day of the Dead. Be especially careful if you've seen one before. Because once you've seen a nahual's true form, you become marked. You become interesting to them, you become prey. So tonight I will not sleep. I will keep my candles burning, my salt lines unbroken. I will wear my medallion and clutch my crucifix, and I will remember that sometimes the most dangerous things aren't the dead who want to visit their loved ones. Sometimes the most dangerous things are those that were never fully human to begin with. The feather sits on my desk as I write this. I should burn it. That's what all the old stories say to do. Burn anything a nahual leaves behind, because objects can be used as connections, as anchors, as ways to find you again and again. But I can't bring myself to touch it now, because each time I look at it, it seems to have grown larger since I last checked. And sometimes when the light hits it just right, I swear I can see it pulse like something alive, like something breathing, like something waiting. If you're reading this and it's the Day of the Dead, look carefully at your altar. Check each photograph. Ask yourself if you truly know who you're inviting into your home tonight. Because not everything that answers your invitation will be what you expect. And not everything that comes through will want to leave when the candles burn out and dawn breaks across the sky. Some things once invited in find ways to stay. I hear scratching outside my door now. Not like a pet wanting to be let in. More deliberate, more patient. 3 slow scratches, then silence. 3 more, then silence. Like someone or something marking time. Like something that knows I'm listening. Like something that knows the night is still young, and the veil between worlds is growing thinner with each passing moment. I should never have picked up that feather. I should never have looked through that window 26 years ago. I should have remembered what my grandmother said about curiosity and the dead. Some things are not meant to be witnessed by the living. Some doors once opened can never truly be closed again. Scent of the spirit. 10 years have passed, but to me the pain feels as fresh as yesterday. I remember every detail of that fateful day, the day my brother Gabriel left us forever. My name is Lucia, and I was 18 years old at the time while Gabriel was just 16. We were the only siblings in our family, and the bond between us was exceptionally deep. You could say we were 2 halves of one soul. Gabriel was a vibrant teenager, always wearing a radiant smile and capable of brightening any room simply with his presence. He loved music, played guitar, and dreamed of becoming a famous musician someday. None of us could have imagined his life would end so soon. It was a cold January day in Michoacan, Mexico. Gabriel had developed a high fever the night before, but we thought it was just a common flu. Mom gave him fever medication and told him to rest. But by morning, Gabriel's condition had deteriorated rapidly. He was coughing up blood, struggling to breathe, and his fever was so high he was delirious. We rushed him to the hospital. The doctors said it was a rare form of pneumonia that had developed too quickly and too aggressively. Despite their best efforts, Gabriel passed away that afternoon, his hand still gripping mine. His last words were, "Don't cry, Lucia. I'll always be with you." Gabriel's death was like a bomb exploding in our family. My parents, who had always loved each other deeply, began to grow apart. Dad buried himself in work, and Mom seemed to lose her will to live. As for me, I tried to stay strong, but the pain of losing my brother was overwhelming. We decided to cremate Gabriel according to a wish he had once jokingly expressed, "When I die, don't trap me underground, let me be free." The small wooden box containing his ashes became our family's most precious possession. We didn't place it in a cemetery, but kept it in our living room on a small shelf alongside a smiling photograph of him, a smile we would never see again. Gabriel's room became a place no one dared to enter. My parents couldn't bear to see his personal belongings, clothes still hanging in the closet, books still open on the desk, as if Gabriel had just stepped out and would return any moment. We packed everything into cardboard boxes and stored them in the closet, unable to throw them away, but also unable to look at them. Days passed in grief and silence. Then November came, bringing with it the atmosphere of the Day of the Dead, Mexico's traditional festival to remember and welcome back the spirits of departed loved ones. "We should make an altar for Gabriel," Mom suggested one morning, her voice trembling with emotion. It was the first idea she had initiated since Gabriel's death. Dad and I immediately agreed. Perhaps this was a way for us to start healing, to face our pain rather than running from it. We spent the entire day preparing the altar, vibrant orange marigolds, freshly baked pan de muerto bread of the dead, and Gabriel's favorite foods, tacos, al pastor caramel candy, and Coca-Cola. On the altar we placed Gabriel's photograph among pictures of grandparents and other departed relatives, and in the most honored position we placed the wooden box containing his ashes. "Gabriel will visit us tonight," Mom said, smiling for the first time since he passed away. "My son will come home." I wanted to believe that. I really wanted to believe that Gabriel's spirit would return, that I would have a chance to tell him I loved him, that I missed him terribly, and that life was empty without him. But the rational part of me couldn't believe in such mystical things. Still, I kept quiet. If this belief could bring my mother some comfort, I wouldn't destroy it. That night we lit candles around the altar, prayed for Gabriel's soul to find peace, and left all the food for him to enjoy. We went to bed early with deep sadness, but also a tiny glimmer of hope that some kind of miracle might happen. I never imagined that the miracle would actually occur in a way none of us could have anticipated. Screams woke me up early the next morning. "Tell me you did this." That was my mother's voice echoing from the living room, filled with anger and panic. "I didn't do anything. It must have been you." My father responded, his voice equally agitated. I quickly got out of bed, rushing to the living room to see what was happening. My parents were standing opposite each other in front of the altar, faces flushed, fingers pointing accusingly at each other. "What's going on?" I asked, bewildered by the scene. Then I noticed something strange in the air, a scent, a very familiar yet impossible scent. It was Gabriel's cologne. The distinctive fragrance that only my brother used, an expensive men's cologne he had saved up to buy as a self-gift for his 16th birthday. A scent I hadn't smelled in 10 months. "Did you do this?" Mom turned to me, her voice shaking. "Do what?" I was still confused. Mom pointed at the altar and I realized the problem. The wooden box containing Gabriel's ashes had been opened. Inside, the small fabric pouch containing the ashes was no longer in the box, but placed beside it, and the box lid was also set aside. I didn't do it," I stammered, feeling a cold shiver run down my spine. "None of us did this," Dad said, his voice now calmer but still tense. "So who did?" Gabriel's cologne scent was becoming increasingly pronounced. It wasn't a subtle fragrance, but very strong, as if someone had just sprayed an entire bottle of cologne in the room. It permeated the space, infiltrated our nostrils, and made it impossible to think about anything else. "This smell," Mom spoke up, her eyes widening. "This is Gabriel's cologne." "Yes," I confirmed, my heart pounding. "Exactly his cologne." We looked at each other, no one daring to say what we were all thinking. Could Gabriel really have returned the cologne bottle? Dad suddenly spoke, breaking the silence. "It should still be among Gabriel's things. Perhaps someone took it out and sprayed it around here." That was a logical explanation. Too logical, so we quickly clung to it like a lifeline amid the ocean of inexplicable events. Dad quickly went to Gabriel's room, opened the closet, and searched through the cardboard boxes containing his personal items. Mom and I stood at the doorway, not daring to enter the room we had avoided for so many months. "It's not here," Dad announced after searching. "The cologne bottle is not in this box." "Maybe it's somewhere else in the house," Mom suggested, her voice trembling. "We should look more thoroughly." We searched the entire house, looking in every possible nook and cranny, closets, drawers, under beds, in the kitchen, even in the garage. There was no cologne bottle to be found. Meanwhile, the scent remained strong in the air, not fading despite the passing hours. It was most concentrated around the altar area, but it also spread throughout the house as if Gabriel were moving from room to room. "We all know what this means, don't we?" Mom finally spoke up when we had given up the search for the cologne bottle. "Gabriel has visited us, just as tradition says the spirits of the dead return on the Day of the Dead." My father, who had always been practical and less superstitious, didn't object. He simply sat down in the living room chair, staring at the altar with distant eyes. "Maybe so," he said softly. "Maybe our boy really did come back." We sat around the altar, sharing memories of Gabriel. We laughed, remembering his playful pranks, and we cried, thinking about the future he should have had. The scent of Gabriel's cologne embraced us like a warm hug, and for a moment I could feel his presence so strong and clear that I could almost touch it. But deep down I still wondered who had opened the box containing Gabriel's ashes. And if it was truly his spirit, why would he take his own ashes out of the box? Why would he do that? And more importantly, if Gabriel could return to visit us, could he possibly stay? That night, I couldn't sleep. The scent of Gabriel's cologne was still strong in the air, especially in my room. I had the sensation that he was there, sitting in the chair by the window, watching me with that mischievous smile I knew so well. "Gabriel," I whispered into the darkness, "are you here?" There was no answer, of course, but a soft breeze suddenly blew through the room, making the curtains flutter even though all windows were closed. I suddenly remembered ghost stories my grandmother used to tell. She said that during the Day of the Dead, spirits of the departed can communicate with the living through signs a candle suddenly extinguished, a flower falling from the altar, or a special scent appearing from nowhere. "If you're really here," I continued speaking, "let me know. I miss you so much, Gabriel." I sat up in bed, trying to listen for any unusual sound. The room was silent, with only the ticking of the clock and the sound of my light breathing. Then from the dark corner of the room I heard a sound, a guitar string being lightly plucked, creating a single musical note, then silence. My heart pounded wildly. Gabriel's guitar was stored in his room in a cardboard box along with his other belongings. No one had touched it since he passed away. "Gabriel?" I called again, my voice trembling. "Is that you?" Silence. Then another sound, not the guitar this time, but a rustling noise, as if someone were moving in the darkness. I reached over to turn on the bedside lamp. The room was empty with no one else but me. However, on my desk, where there had been nothing before now, lay a small piece of paper. With shaking hands, I picked up the paper. It was a page from Gabriel's journal. I immediately recognized his handwriting. It read, "The long road ahead, but I am not alone. I know they're waiting at the destination. The hardest part is leaving behind those I love." I broke down in tears, clutching the paper to my chest. These were lines Gabriel had written just days before he died, as if he had sensed his fate approaching. "I miss you too," I said to the air. "We all miss you." The cologne scent suddenly became more intense then. As quickly as it had appeared, it gradually faded away until it completely disappeared. The room became strangely cold, and I had the sensation I was once again completely alone. The next morning, I told my parents about my experience the night before. They listened with expressions mixing amazement and skepticism. "Are you sure it wasn't a dream?" Dad asked, though his tone conveyed no real doubt. I handed him the paper. "Does this look like a dream?" Dad took the paper, read Gabriel's words, then silently passed it to Mom. Mom read it, and tears began rolling down her cheeks. "This is a page from my son's journal," she said, "but the journal was stored in a cardboard box in his closet." Together we went to Gabriel's room. For the first time since the day he died, all three of us entered that room simultaneously. Dust had settled on everything, and the air felt heavy with a sense of loss. Dad opened the closet and pulled out the cardboard box marked books and papers. He opened the box and took out Gabriel's leather-bound journal. When he opened it, we discovered a page had been torn out, precisely the page I'd found on my desk. "This can't be explained," Dad whispered, flipping through the other pages of the journal. When he turned to the last page Gabriel had written before he died, we were all shocked by what we read. "I had a strange dream last night. I dreamed I had died and my spirit returned to visit my family during the Day of the Dead. I opened the box containing my own ashes and sprayed cologne around the house so they would know I was there. I wanted to tell them I was okay, that I was still with them, but they couldn't see me. The strange thing is, this dream wasn't scary. It brought a sense of peace. We stood there, three people in a dust-filled room, staring at words that seemed to be a prophecy from Gabriel. No one spoke for a long time. "He knew," Mom finally broke the silence, her voice shaking but determined. "Somehow Gabriel knew." "And he kept his promise," I said, remembering his last words. "I'll always be with you." We continued searching through the cardboard boxes, hoping to find Gabriel's cologne bottle. But it wasn't there, nor was it anywhere else in the house. "Perhaps we don't need to find it anymore," Dad said with a rare smile. "Perhaps Gabriel took it with him as a souvenir from this world." Together we returned to the living room where the altar was still set up. The cologne scent had completely disappeared, but a warm, invisible presence still seemed to permeate the house. I gently placed Gabriel's ashes back into the wooden box and closed the lid. But before doing so, I put the journal page inside with the ashes, a piece of him returning to the rest. Since that day, our family began to heal. Dad no longer buried himself in work. Mom started smiling again, and I learned to live with the pain of losing my brother, transforming it into motivation to live better, to live for Gabriel's part too. Every year on the Day of the Dead, we set up an altar for Gabriel with all his favorite things. And every year on the morning of November 2nd, we smell his cologne again, just a whiff, but enough to let us know he still visits us. It's been 10 years since our first experience with Gabriel's presence during the Day of the Dead. 10 years since we found the page from his journal. 10 years since we read those prophetic lines he wrote before his death. This year I set up the altar by myself. My parents have moved to another city, and I've stayed in the old house which contains too many memories. I took the wooden box containing Gabriel's ashes from the cabinet and placed it in the place of honor on the altar. When I touched the box, I noticed it felt lighter than I remembered. With a strange premonition, I opened the box. Inside the fabric pouch containing the ashes was still there, along with the journal page from Gabriel. But when I opened the pouch to check inside, I discovered that most of the ashes were still there, but a portion had disappeared. Just then, a familiar scent suddenly filled the room. Gabriel's cologne, stronger and clearer than ever before. And with it came the soft sound of a guitar from Gabriel's room, where his guitar was still kept in a cardboard box, untouched for 10 years. I ran to Gabriel's room, opened the door. The room was empty, but the guitar wasn't in its box anymore. It was lying on the bed as if someone had just set it down. And on the pillow was a cologne bottle, exactly the same brand of cologne that Gabriel had used, with more than half the bottle already used. I picked up the cologne bottle, examined the brand label, confirming it was indeed the exact cologne Gabriel had favored. Unbelievably, I checked the manufacturing date on the bottom of the bottle. Manufacturing date 10 months ago, 10 years after Gabriel's death. This cologne bottle couldn't possibly be Gabriel's. It had been recently manufactured. But if so, who had placed it here? And why did it smell exactly like the cologne Gabriel had used, a brand that had discontinued that particular fragrance many years ago? I suddenly realized something. If spirits can return to visit their loved ones on the Day of the Dead, could they also bring material objects from the other side? Or even more, could they recreate their form, if only temporarily? A sound behind me made me turn around. There was no one there, but the room door had closed, though I was certain I had left it open. And on the door a piece of paper was pinned with simple words written on it. "Thank you for keeping my room intact. I'll need it for my next visit." I touched the handwriting, still wet, the ink not yet dry. Someone had just written this only seconds ago. The light in the room suddenly flickered, and in the moment of darkness I saw a figure in the mirror, a young man with dark hair and a familiar smile. When the light returned, there was no one in the mirror but me. I placed the cologne bottle on the shelf and gently closed the door. There are things beyond our understanding, secrets that only the dead know. And perhaps sometimes they share a bit of those secrets with us, the living who still love them. Tonight I will light candles on Gabriel's altar and leave all his favorite foods. And tomorrow perhaps a portion of that food will be gone. Perhaps I'll find another paper with another message from the other side. Or maybe, just maybe, I'll see a figure sitting in the favorite chair playing guitar and singing a song that only the two of us know. Because love, just like the soul, never truly dies. It only transforms, changes form, and sometimes when night falls and candles dance, it finds its way back home. Before night comes, I should call my parents. I need to tell them about the cologne bottle, the paper, and the missing portion of ashes. I need them to understand that Gabriel didn't just return on the Day of the Dead. A part of him never really left. As I reached for my phone, I noticed a missed call from an unidentified number, and a voice message sent exactly at the time I was in Gabriel's room. "Lucia, I'm keeping my promise. I'm still with you, even if you can't see me. But sometimes when the night is dark enough and faith is strong enough, you can sense me. And sometimes, just sometimes, I can be strong enough for you to hear me, like now. I love you, sister." The voice in the message was unmistakably Gabriel's, a voice I hadn't heard in 10 years but could never forget. And as I played and replayed the message, I realized something. The background of the voice message wasn't silence. It was the sound of ocean waves, laughter, and distant music, the sounds of somewhere else, a place that someday all of us will reach. I hold the phone tightly against my ear, tears streaming down my face as I listen to my brother's voice. For 10 years I've wondered where he went, what happens after we die, if there's anything beyond this life. Now I have a glimpse, not a complete answer, but a whisper, a scent, a note from a guitar string, and somehow that's enough. Enough to know that death isn't what we fear it to be. That connections don't end when heartbeats do. That love finds ways to bridge worlds. Tonight, as the sun sets and the candles are lit on the altar, I'll sit quietly and listen. Not just for Gabriel, but for all those who might be visiting, crossing back for a brief moment to remind us that they aren't really gone. Because that's what the Day of the Dead truly teaches us, not to fear death, but to recognize it as another form of existence. Not to grieve endlessly, but to celebrate the connections that transcend physical presence. And perhaps if I'm very quiet, if the night is very still, I might hear more than just Gabriel's voice in a recorded message. I might hear whispers from the other side telling stories of where they've been, what they've seen, and the journeys that await us all. The cologne bottle sits on my altar now next to the partially empty pouch of ashes and the journal page, not as objects of mourning, but as bridges between worlds, as proof that sometimes, just sometimes, those we love find ways to reach back across the divide and touch our lives once more. And in that touch, in that scent, in that whispered message, there is more comfort than any philosophy or religion could ever provide. There is the simple truth that has sustained humans across cultures and centuries. Death is not the end. It is merely a door. And sometimes that door swings both ways. Whispers in the night. Childhood memories often fade with time, but some memories remain vivid, impossible to forget. For me, Ana Cortez, one of the clearest memories is from the Night of the Dead, when I was 10 years old, the night I first heard the whispers of the dead. I grew up in the outskirts of Guadalajara, Mexico, with my parents, and my Aunt Isabella, my mother's sister. Aunt Isabella was a single, independent, and mysterious woman. Unlike other middle-aged women in our family and neighborhood, she had no husband or children. She worked at a local library and lived alone in a small house with a backyard full of marigold flowers. I always felt there was something special different about her, as if she knew secrets others didn't. Every weekend, my parents would allow me to stay at Aunt Isabella's house. Those were my favorite times. We would read books, bake cookies, and she would tell me ancient stories that she said had been passed down through generations of our family. Many of these stories involved the world of the dead, and how souls could travel between worlds. There are times during the year, Aunt Isabella would often say, when the veil between the world of the living and the dead becomes thin, and during those moments, Anna, we can sense the presence of departed loved ones. Aunt Isabella took the Day of the Dead particularly seriously. She spent weeks preparing for the festival, decorating her house with vibrant flowers, lanterns, and of course an elaborate altar placed in the front hallway of her home. She devoted time and care to selecting each item for the altar, from old photographs of grandparents, uncles, and aunts, to their favorite foods and drinks. Aunt Isabella's house had an interesting architectural feature. From the main bedroom, where I usually slept with her when staying overnight, there was a large window looking directly into the front hallway, where the altar was placed. The window had a thick curtain, and when the curtain was drawn back, I could see the entire altar and part of the front yard leading to the gate and street. The year I was 10, in late October, my parents had to travel for work for a week. As usual, I was sent to stay with Aunt Isabella. That year, November 1st, the Day of the Dead, fell on a Saturday, the second day of my stay at her house. "This year will be very special, Anna," Aunt Isabella said as we decorated the altar on Saturday morning. "Tonight is the night when adult souls return, and tomorrow, Sunday, is the day of children's souls." "How do you know they really return?" I asked, still placing a sugar skull on the altar. "I've never seen them." Aunt Isabella smiled mysteriously. "There are many ways to know, my dear. Sometimes it's the scent of a familiar perfume. Sometimes it's a sudden warmth in a cold room. And sometimes, if you're quiet enough and attentive, you can hear them." "Hear them?" I opened my eyes wide, both curious and skeptical. "Yes, hear them," she affirmed, "but not with ordinary ears. You hear with your heart and soul. Tonight, when everyone is asleep and the world becomes quiet, that's when they come." I wasn't sure if I believed what Aunt Isabella was saying. I was 10 years old enough to start doubting fairy tales and legends, but there was something in the way she spoke and the sincere look in her eyes that made me want to believe. All day we finished decorating the altar, cooked traditional dishes like mole and pan de muerto, and lit candles throughout the house. As darkness fell, Aunt Isabella's house looked like an island of light in the quiet street. Our altar, placed in the front hallway, glowed with candles and vibrant flowers, creating a scene both solemn and warm. "Now we should go to sleep," Aunt Isabella said after lighting the last candle, "to give our visitors their privacy." I followed her into the main bedroom, changed into my pajamas, and climbed onto the large bed we shared when I stayed over. From this position through the curtained window, I could still see the faint light from the candles on the altar, casting shadows into the room. "Good night, Anna," Aunt Isabella said, kissing my forehead. "Sleep well, or if you wake up in the middle of the night, listen quietly. You might hear them." With that wish, she turned off the lights and the room fell into darkness, illuminated only by the dim glow from the distant candles outside. I quickly fell asleep, tired after a long day of preparations. Little did I know that just a few hours later, I would wake up and experience something that even to this day I cannot fully explain. I don't know exactly what woke me. Perhaps it was a breeze through the partially open window or a soft rustling sound from somewhere in the house. When I opened my eyes, the room was pitch black, except for a dim light coming through the window light from the candles on the altar in the hallway. I turned toward Aunt Isabella, but she appeared to still be deeply asleep. The digital clock on the bedside table showed 3:12 a.m., the time that, according to my aunt, was the deepest part of the night when the world of the living is at its quietest and the world of the dead is closest. Right then I heard a soft sound like whispers from multiple voices coming from the direction of the front hallway where the altar was placed. At first I thought it might be the wind or perhaps neighbors talking outside. But as I listened more carefully, I realized this sound was different. It wasn't the wind, nor was it normal speech. It was whispers, many soft voices overlapping each other, creating a kind of sound I had never heard before. Not too loud, but clear enough that I could hear it from my bed. My heart began to beat faster. I remembered Aunt Isabella's words about being able to hear the departed returning on this night. Could it really be them? The spirits of departed loved ones whispering outside the window? Curiosity overcame fear, and I slowly sat up in bed, trying not to wake Aunt Isabella. I carefully slid out of bed and moved toward the window. The thick curtain blocked the view outside, but as I got closer, the whispers became clearer. With trembling hands, I slowly pulled aside a small corner of the thick curtain, just enough to see into the front hallway. What I saw made my breath catch. Our altar was illuminated by dozens of candles, creating a warm glow in the darkness. And around the altar, moving like ethereal shadows, were what at first impression appeared to be small candles, or at least that's what I initially thought. But upon closer inspection, I realized they weren't candles. They were lights, small points of light moving around the altar as if being carried by invisible hands. And the whispers, they came from those moving lights. Many soft voices talking to each other, creating a mixed sound that I couldn't separate into individual words. I stood there mesmerized, unable to take my eyes off the strange scene outside. I didn't feel afraid, strangely enough. Instead, I felt an intense curiosity and an odd sense of familiarity, as if I were witnessing something that deep in my soul I had always known was real. Just then, Aunt Isabella spoke from behind me, making me jump. "Anna," she said softly, her voice showing no surprise, "you should get back to bed." I turned around to see her sitting up in bed, watching me with a calm expression. "Aunt," I whispered, still not taking my eyes off the window. "I can hear voices and see lights out there. There are people outside." Aunt Isabella smiled gently. "Not people as you think, Anna. This is the night they return. Remember our departed loved ones." "But I really see lights," I insisted. "And I hear whispers." "I know," Aunt Isabella said, her voice dropping. "I hear them too, every year on this night. They come to receive the gifts we've left for them to be with us once more, if only for a brief moment." She motioned for me to return to bed. "Let them have their privacy, Anna. We shouldn't look directly. It's a courtesy to the dead." Reluctantly, I let the curtain fall back into place and returned to bed, but my mind was still captivated by what I had witnessed. I lay down next to Aunt Isabella, but couldn't stop listening to the distant whispers still audible through the window. "Aunt," I whispered, "who are they? How do you know they're our relatives?" Aunt Isabella stroked my hair, her voice gentle but certain. "Those whose pictures and objects we place on the altar, our grandparents, our departed relatives. But not just them. On this night many souls move between worlds. Some visit family, some wander seeking connection." "Is it dangerous?" I asked, a bit of worry creeping into my mind. "Not for us," Aunt Isabella reassured me. "They're not here to harm. They just want to be remembered to feel they're still a part of us. That's why we celebrate this festival, not to mourn death, but to honor life and the eternal bond between the living and the dead." Aunt Isabella's explanations didn't completely dispel my fears, but they sparked a deeper curiosity. I lay there listening to the whispers and wondering about the nature of death and what lies beyond the thin veil between our world and theirs. "Aunt," I whispered again after a while, "how can you see and hear them? Not everyone can write." Aunt Isabella was silent for a moment before answering. "In our family, Anna, there is a special gift that passes from one generation to the next. The ability to sense the presence of the departed, especially on nights like this. Your grandmother had it. Your mother has it, though she chooses not to use it. And now it seems you have it too." "Really?" I asked, both surprised and proud. "Yes," she nodded. "Not everyone can hear the whispers, Anna. Not everyone can see the lights moving in the night. You're special. And with this gift comes responsibility." "What responsibility?" "To maintain traditions, to respect the dead, and most importantly to understand that death is not an end but merely a transition." Aunt Isabella pulled me closer, hugging me tighter. "Now sleep, my dear. Let our visitors enjoy their feast. In the morning we will know they've been here." "How will we know?" I asked, my eyelids already growing heavy. "You'll see," Aunt Isabella said with a mysterious smile. "Now sleep well. The whispers will lull you into sweet dreams." And strangely enough, that's exactly what happened. The whispers from outside, instead of frightening me, had a soothing effect like a lullaby. I gradually drifted into sleep, the whispers becoming the backdrop for strange dreams about people I had never met but somehow felt familiar. Perhaps the faces from old photographs on the altar, or perhaps the spirits whispering out there finding their way into my dreams. When I woke up the next morning, sunlight was already flooding the room. Aunt Isabella was no longer lying beside me. I could hear her working on something in the kitchen. I sat up, rubbing my eyes, and tried to remember what had happened the night before. Was it a dream? The whispers, the points of light moving around the altar. Or was it truly what Aunt Isabella had said, the spirits of departed loved ones returning to visit us? I slid off the bed and went to the window, pulling the curtain aside to look at the front hallway. In the daylight, our altar was still standing there, but something had changed. The food items we had left the night before, pan de muerto mole fruits and candy, had been disturbed. Not that they had disappeared completely, but each item showed clear signs of having been enjoyed. A bite taken from the bread, some mole reduced, some fruits moved from their original positions. "Aunt," I called out, running from the bedroom and into the kitchen. "The altar, the food has—" "I know," Aunt Isabella said, smiling as I burst into the kitchen. She was standing by the stove preparing breakfast. "They came just as I told you." "But who ate the food?" I asked, still confused. "Did you go out last night after I fell asleep?" She shook her head. "No, Anna. I stayed with you all night. It was them, the spirits we invited. They came to enjoy our gifts, to feel our love, and to remind us that they are still here in some way." I wasn't entirely convinced, but after what I had seen and heard the night before, I couldn't deny that something inexplicable had occurred. "After breakfast," Aunt Isabella said. We will go to the cemetery to visit your grandparents' graves. Today is the day of children's souls, but we should still pay respect to all our departed relatives. After breakfast, we dressed and prepared to go to the local cemetery. Before leaving, Aunt Isabella took some time to rearrange the altar, placing some new items on it to replace those that had been enjoyed the night before. As we walked to the cemetery, I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. "Aunt," I asked as we walked along the familiar path, "why could I hear and see them? You said it's a special gift in our family, but why us?" Aunt Isabella thought for a moment before answering. "There are families," she finally spoke. "Lineages marked by a special connection to the other side. Doorkeepers, they called them in ancient days. People who can see and sense what others cannot. Our family is one of them." "But how?" "The story goes that many generations ago," Aunt Isabella continued, "an ancestor of ours, a young woman named Maria, saved a drowning child in the river. But after pulling the child ashore and resuscitating it, she realized it wasn't an ordinary child. It was a spirit, a soul of a child who had died in that river many years before. The child's spirit was grateful that Maria had tried to save it, had treated it as a living being rather than fearing it as a ghost. And out of that gratitude it bestowed upon Maria and all her descendants a gift, the ability to see and hear the departed, especially during times like the Day of the Dead, when the veil between worlds is thinnest." "Is that a true story?" I asked, captivated by the tale. "It's what my grandmother told me," Aunt Isabella replied. "And her grandmother told her. It has been passed down through many generations. Whether true or not, the gift is real. You witnessed it last night." We reached the cemetery, a place filled with color and life on this special day. Other families were also there, decorating the graves of their relatives with flowers, candles, and food. The atmosphere was full of laughter and conversation, with none of the gloominess typically associated with death and cemeteries. Aunt Isabella led me to the section where my grandparents were buried. I had never met them. They had died before I was born. She placed flowers and lit candles on their graves, whispering words I couldn't quite catch. As Aunt Isabella prayed, I looked around the vibrant cemetery. And then a strange thing happened. In broad daylight, amid the crowd of living people, I began to see shadows. Not as clear as the points of light I had seen the night before, but definitely there, misty shapes moving between the graves, sometimes pausing next to a family in prayer, sometimes just standing still as if observing. "Aunt," I whispered, gripping Aunt Isabella's hand tightly, "I see them, right now, in daylight." Aunt Isabella looked at me, showing no surprise, just nodding gently. "I know, I see them too. The Day of the Dead isn't just about night, Anna. It's about 48 hours when the two worlds intersect. But during the day under the sun, they are weaker, harder to see. They're like shadows, ripples in the air." "Can't anyone else see them?" I asked, watching the other families who seemed unaware of the shadows moving among them. "Some might," Aunt Isabella said, "those with the gift like us. Or those who have been very close to death, they sometimes can see through the veil. But most people don't see. They celebrate this festival, they decorate, they remember, but they don't actually see or hear those they're remembering. That's why we must cherish our gift, Anna. It's rare and precious." When we returned to Aunt Isabella's house in the afternoon, I felt as if I had stepped into a completely new world, a world where death wasn't the absolute end, where departed loved ones were still around us, just in a different dimension that most people couldn't see. And that evening, as we lit new candles on the altar, preparing for the second night of the Day of the Dead, the night for children's souls, I no longer felt afraid. Instead, I felt a deep connection to this tradition and to the special gift that Aunt Isabella said I possessed. "Tonight," she said as we lit the last candle, "it will be the children's souls. They are more playful, more joyful. Their whispers sound more like laughter. And instead of slow-moving points of light, you might see small, bright streaks moving quickly like fireflies. That's them, the angelitos, the little angels. Will I stay up tonight to see them? I asked, excited by the idea. No. Aunt Isabella shook her head. Last night was for you to recognize your gift. Tonight is for respecting their privacy. We will sleep and let them enjoy their gifts. That's how we honor them most. I nodded, understanding that Aunt Isabella was right. But as we went to sleep that night, I still couldn't help but listen, hoping to hear the whispers and laughter of the children's souls visiting. 15 years have passed since that Day of the Dead night, the night I first heard the whispers of the dead. I am now 25 years old, no longer the curious 10-year-old child, but the memory of that night and what I learned from Aunt Isabella still lives vividly in my mind. Aunt Isabella passed away 2 years ago, a peaceful death in her sleep at the age of 68. I inherited her small house along with all her books, decorations, and of course the tradition of setting up the altar for the Day of the Dead. This year I have spent weeks preparing the altar, a larger, more elaborate one than what Aunt Isabella and I used to create together. On it I placed photographs of grandparents, departed uncles and aunts, and of course Aunt Isabella. I set out her favorite wine, the book she was reading when she died, and the shawl she often wore on cold days. I also invited Elena, the 6-year-old daughter of my neighbor, to help me decorate. Elena is a special child, quiet, observant, and sometimes saying things beyond her years. I've noticed the way she stares into empty corners of the room, the way she sometimes turns her head as if hearing something no one else can hear. I've recognized the signs just as Aunt Isabella recognized them in me many years ago. "Miss Anna," Elena asked as we placed marigolds on the altar, "why do we do this? Do the dead really come back?" I looked down at her large, curious eyes and smiled. "Some people believe that during the Day of the Dead, the spirits of departed loved ones return to visit us. This altar is how we welcome them, how we let them know we still remember and love them." "Do you believe that?" Elena asked, her eyes not leaving my face. "Yes," I answered honestly. "I do. I think I do too," Elena said after a while, her voice so small I almost didn't hear it. "Because sometimes I see people that nobody else can see. And sometimes I hear voices when there's nobody there." My heart quickened. "Really? Can you tell me more about it?" Elena shrugged, suddenly looking a bit uncomfortable. "My mom says it's just my imagination, that I shouldn't talk about it or people will think I'm weird." "You're not weird," I said, kneeling to look directly into her eyes. "You're special, and I want to tell you a secret. There are people who can see and hear things others can't. I'm one of them, too." Elena's eyes widened. "Really, you see them, too?" "Yes," I nodded. "Especially during days like the Day of the Dead when their world and our world are closer." Elena smiled a radiant smile, full of relief, as if she had just discovered she wasn't alone, that she wasn't strange. "Tonight," I said, "if you wake up and hear whispers from the hallway where the altar is placed, don't be afraid. It's just them, our departed loved ones, visiting us." "Can I look out to see them?" Elena asked, her eyes lighting up with excitement. I thought about this question, remembering Aunt Isabella's words about respecting the privacy of the dead, but I also remembered that it was seeing them, hearing them, that had helped me understand and accept my gift. "If you wake up," I said after a moment, "and feel that you should look, then look. But do so with respect and love, never with fear. They are not here to harm. They are here because they love us and miss us just as we love and miss them." Elena nodded solemnly, as if accepting an important responsibility. That night, after Elena's mother came to pick her up, I finished preparing the altar and lit the candles. As I stood there watching the dancing flames illuminate the faces from old photographs, I felt a familiar presence, a warmth, as if someone was standing right next to me. "Aunt Isabella," I whispered into the still air, "I miss you. I hope you'll like my altar this year." There was no answer, of course. But one candle suddenly burned brighter for a moment, as if responding to me in its own way. I went to bed with a sense of peace and anticipation. I knew that tonight, like every night of the dead for the past 15 years, I would hear the whispers. But this year, one of those whispers would be Aunt Isabella's. As I lay in the darkness listening to the familiar sounds of the old house, I thought about the gift my family had been given, the gift of being able to see and hear through the veil. And I thought about Elena, another child with the same gift, and the responsibility I felt to guide her as Aunt Isabella had guided me. I was just drifting off to sleep when I heard it, the whispers starting very softly but gradually becoming clearer. Not from outside the window this time, but from right inside my bedroom. I opened my eyes feeling no fear, only curiosity. And there, standing beside my bed, was a misty but recognizable figure, Aunt Isabella, looking younger and healthier than in her final years, but unmistakably her. "Aunt," I whispered, tears welling up in my eyes. Aunt Isabella didn't speak, but she smiled and placed an ethereal hand on my cheek. I couldn't feel the touch in a physical sense, but there was a warmth, a definite presence. She beckoned for me to follow her, and I sat up, getting out of bed. She led me to the window where we could look out into the front hallway where the altar was placed. And there, just like many years ago, I saw them not just points of light this time, but misty forms of human shapes moving around the altar, touching the gifts, looking at the photographs. An elderly man holding Aunt Isabella's wine glass, smiling at her photograph. A woman stroking the shawl I had placed on the altar. And many others, some I recognized from family photographs, others I didn't. I could hear them more clearly than ever before, the whispers, the soft conversations, occasionally a gentle laugh. They weren't ghosts, weren't frightening specters. They were just people. People in a different state of existence, but still people. Aunt Isabella stood beside me, looking out at the scene with a serene smile. Then she turned to me and again placed her hand on my cheek. This time I could feel a slight pressure, like a gentle breeze. "Thank you, Aunt," I whispered, "for everything you taught me. I will pass it on to Elena, just as you passed it on to me." Aunt Isabella nodded, her smile radiant with pride and love. Then she directed me back to bed, gesturing for me to return to sleep. I complied, knowing this wasn't the last time I would see her. Every year during the Day of the Dead, she would return. And someday, when it was my turn to cross the veil, I too would return to visit those I left behind. As I lay down about to drift off, I heard a sound from outside my window. Not the whispers of adults this time, but the giggling of a child. I smiled in the darkness, wondering if Elena had awakened tonight and heard the whispers, if she had seen what I saw so many years ago. The world is full of mysteries, and death might be the greatest of them all. But on the Day of the Dead, for those with a gift, that mystery becomes a little less profound. The veil thins, the whispers come, and for a brief moment we can sense that death is not the end, it's just another form of existence. And as I close my eyes, listening to the whispers that have become so familiar over the years, I feel a profound gratitude for this gift, for this tradition, and for the knowledge that those we love are never truly gone. They're just waiting on the other side of the veil, occasionally finding their way back to remind us that the bonds of love transcend even death itself. The candles will burn through the night, the marigolds will release their scent into the air, and the spirits will whisper their secrets. And in the morning there will be signs of their visit, food that has been tasted, objects slightly moved, perhaps even messages left behind. Because the Day of the Dead isn't about mourning or fear. It's about remembering that the line between life and death isn't as solid as we think. It's about honoring the connection that remains long after physical presence has faded. And most importantly, it's about listening for the whispers that remind us we are never truly alone, even in our darkest moments. Because those who have loved us continue to watch over us, continue to visit when the veil is thin enough to allow passage. Tonight I will listen. And tomorrow I will begin to teach Elena what Aunt Isabella taught me, that she is not strange, not imagining things, but blessed with a rare and precious gift. The gift of hearing the whispers in the night. A loyal companion. The year 1999. I was witnessing my grandfather's decline from Alzheimer's disease, a deterioration that had begun after a severe car accident some years earlier. My name is Antonio Orozco, and this is the story of my grandfather Fernando, his beloved Chihuahua named Concha, and an extraordinary occurrence during the Day of the Dead that forever changed how I understand the connection between this world and the next. Grandfather Fernando had survived a terrible car crash that left him with various injuries, but physically he recovered well. His mobility was never compromised. Even years after the accident, he maintained good physical strength and dexterity. What changed, however, was his mind. The doctors explained that the trauma from the accident had contributed to the early onset of Alzheimer's disease, a diagnosis that came as a devastating blow to our family. As the disease progressed, Grandfather began forgetting people, first distant acquaintances, then close friends, and finally family members. It reached a point where we had to remind him who we were each time we visited, explaining our relationship to him. "Grandfather, it's me, Antonio, your grandson. We used to go fishing together on Tuesdays." Sometimes he'd nod and claim to remember, but the recognition in his eyes was fleeting, replaced by confusion within minutes or hours. The most heartbreaking moments were when he would forget his own children. My father, his eldest son, would visit and be treated like a stranger. The pain in my father's eyes when Grandfather would politely ask, "And you are," was something I'll never forget. But amidst this sea of forgotten faces and names, there was one being. Grandfather never forgot his small Chihuahua dog named Concha. Concha had come into Grandfather's life in an unusual way. He had found her as a tiny, malnourished puppy abandoned on the street corner near his house in Mexico City. Grandfather often recounted how he had nothing on hand to feed the starving puppy, having just returned from the bakery with only a sweetbread roll, a concha de chocolate, a chocolate-topped sweetbread common in Mexico. He removed the sugary topping, softened the bread slightly, and left it for the puppy while he rushed to a nearby store to buy proper dog food. When he returned, the puppy had devoured the bread and was looking at him with hopeful eyes. He named her Concha, after the sweet bread that had been her first meal with him. This was 2 years after my grandmother had passed away, and Grandfather, living alone, couldn't bring himself to give the puppy away or take her to a shelter. So Concha became his faithful companion. For 11 years, Concha was by Grandfather's side, sleeping at the foot of his bed, following him around the house and sitting on his lap while he watched television. Then, tragically, around the same time Grandfather was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, Concha passed away due to old age and heart problems. My Uncle Miguel moved in with Grandfather to care for him as his condition worsened. And it was Uncle Miguel who first noticed something peculiar. Despite forgetting his own children's names, Grandfather never forgot Concha. He would constantly talk about her as if she were still alive, calling for her at mealtimes, saving scraps of food for her, and even preparing her bed each night. At first we thought this was simply another manifestation of his condition, confusing past and present. But then something stranger began to happen. Grandfather started claiming he could see Concha moving around the house. "Concha was running around the living room today," he would tell Uncle Miguel with complete conviction. "She was pulling at my pant leg with her teeth, wanting me to chase her. Then she ran to the kitchen, wagging her tail, and disappeared." These sightings became more frequent as October approached, particularly around the time of the Day of the Dead. Grandfather would often be found wandering the house, calling Concha's name, following what he claimed was her small form darting between pieces of furniture. "She wants me to follow her," he would insist when Uncle Miguel tried to guide him back to his chair. "She's trying to show me something. I just can't catch up to her fast enough." Uncle Miguel didn't know how to respond to these claims. Unlike the normal confusion Grandfather exhibited mixing up names, dates, or places, these Concha sightings had a strange consistency to them. Grandfather always described her actions in the same way. She would appear, pull at his clothing, or bark to get his attention, lead him on a chase through the house, and always end up disappearing between the living room couches, the spot where Concha used to curl up and sleep when Grandfather watched television. Most distressingly, each time Uncle Miguel would gently remind Grandfather that Concha had passed away years ago, it was as if Grandfather was hearing this devastating news for the first time. His face would crumple in grief, tears would flow, and he would shake his head in disbelief. "No, that can't be right. I just saw her. She was right here." And within days, sometimes hours, he would forget this conversation entirely and once again see Concha running through the house. Uncle Miguel found himself in a difficult position. Was it crueler to continually remind Grandfather of his beloved pet's death, forcing him to relive the grief over and over, or to allow him to exist in a world where Concha was still alive, even if only in his mind? What made the situation even more puzzling was Grandfather's behavior regarding his favorite armchair. Since Concha's death, he had never sat in it again. When asked why, he would say, "It's too sad and empty without her beside me." Yet despite not remembering that Concha had died, he still avoided that chair. It was as if some part of him knew she was gone, even while another part saw her running through the house. As the Day of the Dead approached, Uncle Miguel and our family set up a traditional altar in the house with photographs of departed family members, including my grandmother, and at my suggestion, a small picture of Concha. We placed Concha's favorite treats, small dog biscuits, and a tiny piece of sweetbread beside her photo. On the evening of November 1st, Uncle Miguel called my father with troubling news. Grandfather had been increasingly agitated all day, claiming that Concha was appearing more frequently than usual. "It's different today," Uncle Miguel explained over the phone. "Usually he sees her once or twice a day, but today he's been chasing after her almost constantly, and he always ends up in the same spot between the couches where she used to sleep." My father and I decided to visit the next morning. When we arrived, Uncle Miguel met us at the door with solemn news: Grandfather had passed away during the night. "I found him this morning," Uncle Miguel said, his voice breaking. "He was sitting in his armchair, the one he hasn't sat in since Concha died. He looked peaceful, like he just decided to take a nap." As we processed this shocking news, Uncle Miguel shared something that sent chills down my spine. "There's something else," he said hesitantly. "I don't know if I should tell you this because you might think I'm losing my mind too, but last night I heard barking. Small, high-pitched barks like a chihuahua's. I thought I was dreaming, but I'm not so sure anymore." We held Grandfather's funeral 2 days later. As family members gathered to share memories, a pattern emerged in their stories. Many recalled how Grandfather and Concha had been inseparable, how the little dog would follow him everywhere, how he would sneak her treats under the table at family dinners. "He loved that dog more than anything after Grandmother passed," my aunt remarked. "It's almost poetic that he would pass away on the Day of the Dead, when the spirits of loved ones are said to return to visit us." The comment struck me deeply. I'd never been particularly superstitious, but the timing seemed too meaningful to be coincidental. Could it be that Concha's spirit had actually returned during the Day of the Dead, and if so, had she come back not just to visit, but to guide Grandfather to the other side? The following year, when the Day of the Dead came around again, I decided to create an altar in my own apartment. I placed photographs of Grandfather and Concha side by side, surrounded by marigold flowers and candles. I wasn't sure what I believed, but the ritual felt important, a way to honor their memory and the special bond they shared. That night, something unexplainable happened. I was awakened around 3 a.m. by what sounded like the clicking of nails on hardwood floor, the distinctive sound of a small dog walking across the room. Fully alert now, I heard what seemed to be a soft whimper, followed by the heavier sound of human footsteps. I lay perfectly still, not daring to move or open my eyes as the sound circled my bed, once then retreated toward the door. Only when I heard what sounded like my front door opening and closing did I finally open my eyes and turn on the light. The apartment was empty. the door still locked from the inside. In the morning, I discovered something that sent shivers through me. I had scattered a thin layer of flour around my altar the night before. An old tradition my grandmother had taught me said to reveal the footprints of visiting spirits. And there in the flour were two distinct sets of prints, the small four-toed prints of a dog, and beside them human footprints. They led from the altar to my bedroom, circled once, and then headed toward the back door, where they simply stopped. I've maintained this tradition every year since then, placing photographs of Grandfather and Concha on my Day of the Dead altar. And while I haven't seen footprints in flour again, I sometimes wake to the sound of nails clicking on hardwood, followed by the heavier tread of human footsteps. Last year, I came across a scientific paper that caught my attention. Researchers studying Alzheimer's patients had documented cases of what they called terminal lucidity periods, where patients experience unexpected mental clarity shortly before death. More intriguingly, they noted instances where patients reported seeing deceased loved ones, including pets, in the days leading up to their passing. The researchers proposed a theory: what if these weren't hallucinations, but rather a genuine perception of something most of us cannot see? What if, as the brain begins its final shutdown, it becomes capable of perceiving aspects of reality that normally remain hidden to us? What if Grandfather really was seeing Concha in those final days? I don't have definitive answers. Science might call it hallucination or coincidence, but in my heart I believe something more profound was at work. I believe that on that Day of the Dead in 1999, Concha's spirit really did return, not just to visit, but to guide my grandfather across the threshold between worlds. My grandfather forgot many things as Alzheimer's ravaged his mind. He forgot names, faces, and experiences. He forgot his children and grandchildren, but he never forgot Concha. Their bond transcended memory, transcended illness, and ultimately, I believe, transcended death itself. This is why each year when I set up my altar for the Day of the Dead, I place extra care in arranging the photographs of my grandfather and his faithful little dog. I scatter flower light candles and leave small offerings. And sometimes in the deepest part of the night I wake to the sound of clicking nails and gentle footsteps. A reminder that love, even the love between a man and his dog, can forge connections that not even death can sever. The Day of the Dead is not about mourning those we've lost, but celebrating the ongoing connections we maintain with them. It's about recognizing that the boundary between life and death is perhaps more permeable than we normally believe. And sometimes when that boundary is at its thinnest, those we love find ways to reach back across the divide. In the years since my grandfather's passing, I've spoken with many people who care for patients with Alzheimer's and dementia. Many have shared similar stories, tales of patients who forget everything except a beloved pet, who speak to animals no one else can see, who follow invisible companions through hallways and rooms. Perhaps these aren't signs of deterioration at all, but glimpses of a perception that extends beyond our limited understanding. Perhaps as we near the end of life, we begin to see the guides who wait to escort us on our final journey. I don't know if my grandfather recognized what was happening in those final days. I don't know if he understood that Concha was leading him toward something not just around the living room furniture. But I like to think that in those last moments, as he finally sat in his favorite chair, the one he had avoided since Concha's death, there was recognition, clarity, and peace. And I like to think that when he closed his eyes for the final time, he opened them again to find Concha waiting, tail wagging, ready to guide him on one last journey, this time together. Last week, while visiting my elderly neighbor who has recently been diagnosed with early-stage Alzheimer's, I noticed something that gave me pause. Her cat had passed away months ago, yet she kept looking toward empty corners of the room, smiling and murmuring the cat's name. When I gently reminded her that her pet had died, she looked at me with surprising clarity. "Oh, I know she's dead," she said, "but that doesn't mean she's gone. There's a difference, you know. She comes to visit me sometimes." "I think she's waiting for me," I didn't contradict her. Instead, I asked what her cat does when she visits. She leads me places, my neighbor replied with a small smile. Always to the same spot by the window where she used to sit in the sun. I think she's trying to show me something important, but I haven't figured it out yet. As I left her house that day, I couldn't help but wonder, what do they see these people standing at the threshold between worlds? What wisdom might they share if only we had the patience to listen? And when my time comes, will there be a companion waiting to guide me on that final journey? I like to think so. I like to think we all have our own version of Concha, a loyal friend who refuses to let us face the darkness alone. So this year, when the Day of the Dead arrives, I'll scatter my flower, arrange my photographs, and wait with an open heart. Because sometimes, if we're very lucky, we get a glimpse beyond the veil. And what we see there isn't frightening at all, but deeply, profoundly familiar, like coming home after a very long journey to find those we love waiting with open arms, and perhaps, just perhaps, with wagging tails.